Sorry I'm late. Thank you all for waiting. And I especially thank
never late.
Never late. For the first time he was on time and I was. I want to thank all the organizations and individuals who've come up today to join us and support our effort to protect veterans from being defrauded and other student borrowers as well by Secretary Betsy DeVos's new borrower defense rule. I want to thank Tasha Burkholder, Ohio Army veteran and former ITT Tech student, who's here with us today to share her story. Tasha, that's you? Good. In the coming weeks, my Republican colleagues in the Senate, I hope, will join the Democrats. They have a choice. They can stand with these organizations and veterans like Tasha and vote to overturn the DeVos borrower defense rule, or they can vote to deny defrauded veterans, veterans who've been lied to by these schools, and student borrowers from the loan relief that Congress intended for them when we created the amendment to the Higher Education Act. Under the DeVos rule, just 3% of loans associated with misconduct will be forgiven. 3%. The reason? The rule places new burdens on defrauded borrowers like these veterans that many will never be able to meet. Under the DeVos rule, defrauded borrowers have to prove the school intentionally defrauded and harmed them. Now, how are they going to prove it? And the DeVos rule eliminates the opportunity for group discharges for borrowers that experience similar misconduct from the same school. Instead, Betsy DeVos would make defrauded veteran borrowers apply on their own as individuals, making each submit evidence and proving their cases individually. She's basically telling these veterans and borrowers, you're on your own, lawyer up. We know the hardships that defrauded borrowers face. We'll hear about them in a moment. Now Secretary DeVos wants to make them jump through impossible hoops for relief. The DeVos rule slashes relief for defrauded veteran borrowers, making taxpayers pay a higher proportion of relief that is granted. The only winners here are the predatory schools that the DeVos rule shields from accountability, financial in other words. Our veterans and service members deserve better than that. So I hope when this resolution comes for a vote that all of those who give great speeches on the floor and back home about how much we honor our veterans can show it with their votes. I know one person who will, and that's the Democratic leader of the United States Senate, my colleague Chuck Schumer.
Well, thank you, Senator Durbin. And Senator Durbin's had a passion for maybe close to a decade of preventing these for-profit schools from taking advantage of students. And basically, so many of them just rip the federal government off. They say, we're going to get students loans, we're not going to give them the right education, and then we're all left, the poor students, and everyone else is left holding the bag while the owners of these for-profit schools do just the word that some of these schools are intended to be is just the last word, profit, not education. So I want to thank Senator Durbin for his leadership, and to the veterans and veterans organizations who are here today, whose strong advocacy on behalf of defrauded borrowers has made a real impact. They're defending veterans who have defended us, and they're defending many young people who are not veterans as well, who are also victimized. We're here because President Trump and Betsy DeVos have once again taken away protections for hardworking Americans trying to get ahead. The borrower defense rule was put in place to protect students and give relief when they're misled, cheated, defrauded by the for-profit colleges. How could anyone argue with that? How could anyone argue with that? If you get cheated by your school, if you pay big money to a for-profit institution and they don't deliver, you should be protected financially, just like any consumer is protected by law from fraud and from false advertising. But right now, tens of thousands of borrower relief applications are held up at the Department of Education. Tens of thousands of students. Betsy DeVos is in the pocket of the for-profits. So is so much of the Republican Party these days. And I'm sure it's one of those cases of show me the money. I'll bet they contribute a lot. But it's outrageous because look who the victims are. Folks like Tara, who've defended our country. They bravely served our country, and they are targeted specifically by these for-profit institutions. They come back from Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else around the globe, and they got to get their footing. So the for-profits swoop in and say, here's an easy path. And many of these young people figured, okay, why not? It's college. And then they're left holding the bag. The Trump administration, instead of protecting the students, is doing the complete opposite. It's hurting them. They've changed the rule to make it harder for students to apply for protection and less likely that they'd get reimbursed. Excuse me. President Trump himself founded one of these predatory schools, promising great secrets of success in the real estate world. Turns out profits were the bottom line, not student success. Do you remember Trump University? So no wonder this administration's in the pocket of the for-profits. 10 years ago, a federal judge finalized a $25 million settlement between the President of the United States, then soon-to-be President of the United States, and his students. He had to pay $25 million for ripping off the kids. But many of these institutions have done even worse. Students cheated by the for-profit schools deserve the same support as those who went to Trump University have gotten. So soon, Senate Democrats, with the great and indefatigable leadership of Senator Durbin, will force a vote to overturn the Trump administration's rule. I am asking every student, every family, every person who cares about justice to call their senators, particularly our Republican senators, and say, pass Durbin's bill, and we can protect students. I look forward to working with him shoulder to shoulder to make sure this is done. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Gotta
go. So we have a number of veterans here today, and it's kicked off by Tasha Burkholder, a U.S. Army veteran and a former ITT Tech student. Take it away, Tasha.
Good afternoon. My name is Tasha Burkholder, and I'm an Army veteran, and I traveled from Lima, Ohio here today to speak. I would like to tell you a bit of my story. After serving in the Army a little over 5 years, I was honorably discharged for medical reasons. I wanted to find a path in my life to make things better for myself and my family. My goal was to pursue a career in the FBI as a criminal behavioral analysis and forensics. I went to ITT Tech from 2006 to 2010, earning what I thought was going to be a bachelor degree of science. At the time, ITT Tech seemed like a really good option for me. It was advertised that they had high-tech criminal justice program, and admissions staff told me that the GI Bill would cover my full tuition. I was told that they also assisted after graduation for job placement, and I would have a job in my field in no time. My first red flag I encountered was when I tried transferring to a different school my sophomore year. I was told not only that my credits would not transfer, but the books I were using was outdated, and I would have to start completely over. After being frustrated and speaking to my chair at ITT Tech, I relied again on the promises of this school, and I decided to stay and finish out my degree. Unfortunately, my trust put me back in a position to continually be lied to. ITT Tech wasn't a high-tech school at all, yet I still foot the bill for a low-quality education. My GI Bill did not cover all of my tuition, and I had to take out additional federal and personal student loans. As I stand here today, I currently owe almost $100,000 in student loans. For a degree that no one takes seriously, whenever I told employers at job interviews where I went, I was shown the door. Out of 50 students that I graduated with, only 2 that I know of are in our field, but those jobs don't require the degree. Being married with 4 children, 3 in school and a 2-year-old at home, has been a hard challenge for me. It's hard to provide a comfortable life for them and to keep a stable home with consistency because I can't find a job in my field. I use my whole GI Bill, yet still made to take out additional loans and still have no real degree. No GI Bill to go back to school, and an extreme amount of debt. I have dealt with stress, anxiety, and depression over the whole ordeal for years. It's been a strain on my marriage, my children, and our livelihood. Sometimes I don't even feel capable of being a good mother or a wife because of the stress that these loans have given me. I didn't just miss my one shot to use my GI Bill. I'm overwhelmed by my student loan debt. I've lost homes, cars. I've had to move state to state. I've had to live with my parents and my in-laws. And I've lost time that I cannot get back. And sometimes I feel like I've lost my sanity. I just want help with my loans and my life back. Student veterans should not be left to pay for schools that are misleading and deceiving them. I appreciate you, Senator Durbin, all of the work on the issues that you've done. And I really pray that everyone affected by these issues and the fraudulent schools, that it'll be forgiven and some sort of compensation will come forth. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What an outrage. She serves her country. She's given a GI Bill to get on with her life. She uses that GI Bill and finds out it's a worthless education and then $100,000 in debt at top of that. And when this ITT is notorious for what they did to you and so many students, and now when you go to the Department of Education, which is supposed to help you, for 3 years, the Secretary of Education refuses to give you loan forgiveness under this circumstance. And now she comes up with a rule that's even worse going forward in the future. Thank you for serving our country. I hope my colleagues in the Senate will say thank you with their votes. Let me introduce at this point John Kamen, Assistant Director of the Veterans Employment and Education Division of the American Legion. I want to thank the American Legion especially for stepping up, all the veterans organizations, but they sent me a great letter which I've circulated. John?
On behalf of National Commander Bill Oxford and the nearly 2 million members of the American Legion, I'd like to thank Senator Durbin for his abiding attention on this issue. And until very recently, this was not something that was remotely on our radar. But at our 2017 National Convention, our membership passed Resolution Number 82, Preserve Veteran and Service Member Rights to Gainful Employment and Borrower Defense Protections. So what happened and why the change? The answer is written in the headlines that we've seen over the past 2 years. Corinthian colleges close, ITT Tech shutters its doors, and recently Argosy University ceasing operations in 2019. And the connecting thread with all of them was the aggressive targeting of veterans. We can report that it is a fact that veterans are often singled out and targeted with deceptive, fraudulent, and predatory college recruiting practices, and it is becoming increasingly clear that the borrower defense rule would be critical to student veterans' protections against these lucrative scams. As veterans are aggressively targeted due to their service to our country, it is clear as glass they deserve the right to group relief. The Department of Education's borrower defense rule stripped them of it, forcing veterans to individually prove their claims, share the specific type of financial harm they suffered, and prove the school knowingly made substantial misrepresentations, even when the misrepresentation itself targeted veterans writ large. The preponderance of evidence required for this process is so onerous that, as Senator Durbin noted, the Department of Education itself estimated that only 3% of applicants would get relief. In other words, this rule is not a pathway to relief for student veterans. It is a wall to it. As we speak, thousands of pending applications for relief, including many of the veterans who attended schools like ITT Tech or Corinthian, remain unopened. These are the people who are left holding the tabs as these questions are litigated today. And we're not asking the Senate to come up with a perfect solution to this rule, rather just to acknowledge that we can do better for veterans. The rule that the Department of Education has promulgated flagrantly denies veterans basic dignities to this, and the American Legion calls on the Senate to stand with these veterans and overturn this regulatory action. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Just to bring this down to the real world, as you've described it here, under the new rule, you would have to go out and hire a lawyer who would have to prove what you said here, despite the fact that other students at ITT had exactly the same experience. They have to prove it individually, each and every one of them with their own lawyer under the new Betsy DeVos rule. That is just something that's not practical. With $100,000 in student debt and raising a family, that you're now going to go out and pay a lawyer to represent you in this case, she knows it's going to make it more difficult, and for a lot of students, they're just going to give up and not try. So that's what the bottom line is for too many. James Haynes is here, Federal Policy Manager of the Veterans Education Success. James?
Veterans had a target on their backs when they were in uniform. There's no need to have one again when they go to college. Good afternoon. My name is James Haynes, and I'm the Federal Policy Manager for Veterans Education Success. We are thankful to the House of Representatives for passing CRA HJ Res 76 with bipartisan support, and for Representative Lee and Senator Durbin for their leadership in introducing this vital resolution, and especially to Tasha for sharing her story today. Student veterans are targeted by unscrupulous colleges for their lucrative military education benefits. Veterans Education Success has worked with over 5,000 service members and veterans, and we have seen firsthand how these schools lie to them. They are lied to about whether their credits will transfer, their job prospects, the quality of education, and they are lied to about their tuition. In the end, these students find they were deceived into wasting their hard-earned GI Bill benefits, are left with burdensome student loan debt, and despite promises for their schools, are unable to find a job in the career they studied for. We have helped many veterans apply for borrower defense relief from the Department of Education. These veterans need borrower defense. They need their government to stand up to them for them, just as they stood up to serve our country. The 2016 borrower defense rule did just that. It was an essential tool to provide students necessary relief when a school lied to them. Instead of implementing these rules, the Department of Education has refused to act on them and instead published a new rule that rolls back these common sense regulations. Instead of helping student veterans, the department has foreclosed almost all relief for those who have been defrauded. Instead of helping the students, the department's rules are so arduous that only 3% of claims will be approved by their own estimation. CRA SJ Res 56 brings these protections back for service members and veterans and will ensure schools, not the students, are the ones to bear the burden and be held accountable for their predatory actions. Now is the time for Congress to act. We are hopeful that the Senate will pass this resolution with broad bipartisan support. Service members, veterans, and their families deserve to know that the federal government, which approved these schools, and in doing so put its stamp of approval on them, will ultimately do what's right by the brave men and women who have willingly risked their lives to serve our nation. Thank you.
What an important point. These schools could not have even entertained federal government loans for these students unless their accreditation was recognized by the federal government. So we started off giving a seal of approval to students like yourself to go into these schools thinking, well, this has got to be a good place to go to school. You can get a federal loan here. Turns out we were complicit. When they started cheating the students, we didn't step in and do what we should have done. And you shouldn't have to pay a price for that. Next up is Travis did I pronounce it? Travis Orr, who is the Director of Government Affairs, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Travis?
Good afternoon. On behalf of Iraq and Afghanistan of America's 425,000 members, I want to say thank you to Senators Durbin and Schumer and to all of our VSO allies for their hard work to protect borrower's defense regulations for all students, including military-connected students. IAVA remains committed to defend veterans' education benefits, which includes having strong borrower defense protections. Since its inception, the post-9/11 GI Bill has faced threats of abuse, and IAVA will continue to fight these efforts to ensure that the attempts are not successful. We must continue to not only hold the line in defending these essential earned benefits, but also in providing that they still stay relevant to the changing educational landscape. An incredible 93% of IAVA's members surveyed reported that they have either used the GI Bill benefits, plan to use the GI Bill, or will transfer it to a dependent. And it also has an over 80% approval rating of approved above average. However, the GI Bill is still being exploited by underperforming actors who take advantage of veterans' benefits and often leave veterans stuck with unnecessary debt and a subpar education. Many military-connected students are also first-generation students, myself included, which makes them targets of low-performing predatory schools through no fault of their own. When I started searching for a school after the military, I didn't know where to look or what to look for. I was fortunate enough to find a good local community college to start my college career. However, not all students are as lucky as I was. When students are purposefully defrauded by these predatory schools, there must be protections in place to make things right again. Not only to protect the students, but also the taxpayers. By having strong borrower defense rules in place, we can ensure that not only members of the military, veterans, military families, survivors, and all students are protected from low-performing schools, but the schools are also being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Thanks again to Senator Durbin and all of our VSO partners.
Thanks, Travis. Justin Housechild is the legal fellow at the Student Veterans of America.
So on behalf of the more than 750,000 student veterans that Student Veterans of America represents, I want to thank everybody in this room, including Senator Durbin, for his excellent leadership on this issue in the Senate. I'm going to keep things pretty short here because the issue is pretty simple. Thousands of military-connected students have been impacted by school closures like those we've seen at Corinthian and ITT Tech, among others. Many military-connected students borrow federal student loans because they don't have access to benefits like the GI Bill, or because, as Tasha pointed out, the benefit doesn't cover the full cost of their attendance at the institution while they attend. These students deserve a fair process to have their loans forgiven if they were defrauded by their school. Unfortunately, the Department of Education's new rule creates significant barriers for students seeking loan discharge after being defrauded. Student Veterans of America urges the Senate to vote yes on the Congressional Review Act resolution to overturn the department's misguided borrower defense rule that will ultimately harm not just military-connected students, but all students. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Ashlyn Haycock has the longest title. Deputy Director, Policy and Legislation, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Ashlyn.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashlyn Haycock. I'm with TAPS, the national organization representing all of those who lost a loved one in military service. Because we'd like to reiterate that it's not just veterans who are impacted, but their widows and their children. The families of those who've given the ultimate sacrifice are impacted. And just like my friends up here, I'm going to keep it pretty brief. We as taxpayers should be incredibly concerned by the proposed rule. They are using federal taxpayer dollars to go to these predatory schools, and those predatory schools are not doing right by them. And because the Department of Education is approving these schools, it is the Department of Education's job to make sure that, as consumers, those students who are using federal taxpayer dollars at federally approved schools are taken care of. Thank you so much.
Well, the longest title, but the shortest speech, and a very good one. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ashlyn. Appreciate that. Jennifer Davis is Government Relations Deputy Director for the National Military Family Association.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jen Davis, and I'm the Government Relations Deputy Director for the National Military Family Association. The National Military Family Association is concerned about many provisions in the Department of Education's new Borrower Defense Rule. Specifically, the significant cut in time in which a defrauded borrower may apply for loan discharge, the lack of appeals process should a claim be denied, and the lack of protection against retaliation by the institution against a borrower who has a successful claim. Our nation asks military families to move every few years, and when they move or deploy, military-connected students struggle to transfer credits from one school to another, which results many times in excess money and time spent in getting an education. On top of that, military families are often targeted, as you've heard before today, by bad actor institutions and defrauded out of their Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs education funds. We must stop this from happening. When military-connected students are defrauded out of benefits earned through service to our country, it's up to us to make sure that their futures are safe and their benefits are restored. The Department of Education's new Borrower Defense Rule adds additional unnecessary complications for military-connected students who have already given so much to our country. We appreciate Senator Durbin's resolution to block this rule, which would be harmful to military families. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it very much. Any questions from the media? Yes.
How soon do you plan to enforce this vote? Is it the week after recess?
Well, I thought it would be tomorrow, but it turns out that the War Powers resolution relative to Iran has amendments, and so we won't be able to finish it tomorrow. So my plan, with the cooperation of the majority leader, is as soon as we return from the President's Day recess. Yes.
Right now, what type of bipartisan support do you have on this?
I have a lot of.
There were 6 Republicans.
I have a lot of Republicans who've expressed an interest in this, and I don't have any that have made a verbal commitment to me. But you're looking at my secret weapon here. I believe that veterans organizations appealing to these senators and explaining to them Tasha's story and the stories of so many others can bring them around. 8 or 9 of them that I've spoken to personally, face-to-face, were open to this. They wanted to hear more about it when I approached them a few weeks ago. So these veterans organizations, as we see on the board over here, I think if they reach out to the, as I was listening where some of these folks were from, and I'm thinking, I know who you should call. You know, you can make a big difference. So I think it's a good, strong issue for us. I think we have a good chance. Anyone else? Thanks, everybody. Special thanks to the vets and the organizations that represent them for coming out and make all the difference. Thank you.